Deion is getting recruits to walk straight to Colorado with him. He's done it again. He's flipped the number one recruit yet again. Cormani McClain, top corner, headed to Colorado to play for the Hall of Fame corner in Deion Sanders. Chad, the momentum follows him, Sanders. But I am still surprised how often I see the Colorado Buffaloes football program among the top headlines of any sports page you go to. It's already paid off.
It's going to be a huge upset if they're not nationally relevant. And I'm not talking about just from getting headlines in the offseason. If they're not really good in the Pac-12 in the next 2 years. I don't think it's going to happen this year. They got a really tough schedule to start when you look at who they're playing.
Starts with TCU.
Yeah, that part's going to be tough. But, I mean, they have USC early. They have
Oregon.
They have tough games early on next year.
We have the schedule. I mean, TCU, Nebraska.
Yeah, Nebraska, Colorado State's a rivalry game. Oregon, USC. I mean, it's going to be a tough start to their season. But the way they're grabbing headlines because of Coach Prime, do we go with Deion Sanders? We need to make an editorial decision on this show. Is it Deion or are we going Coach Prime? We can kind of go back and forth.
That's kind of the point, though, is everyone knows who you're talking about.
Yeah. I also noticed that so Barstool Sports did a show with Travis Hunter. Yeah. And then it was revealed that Deion, who worked with Barstool Sports on a show, that part of the reason he ended up going to Jackson State was an NIL deal with Barstool Sports. And then I noticed someone said, I wonder what Barstool is paying this latest player.
Oh, this guy.
Cormani McClain. To go, and Dave Portnoy immediately replied and just said, no comment on what he's paying him to go play for Deion Sanders now. Because we know John Ruiz has one of the most powerful collectives in all of college sports at Miami. So it's not like he wasn't getting paid to go to Miami also. Huge get for Colorado, huge get for Coach Prime. I mentioned watching him on the Manning cast and being blown away with how great he was with the Manning brothers. But you know what else he's smart about doing on that Manning cast? He's got Colorado stuff everywhere. He's got Prime on the sweatshirt. He's got a Colorado helmet behind him. He's in his office with Colorado Buffalo stuff everywhere. So he's a marketing savant, and that marketing is going to pay off big time for Colorado, and they're going to get some dudes. If they get the right coaches, and I like what they've done with some of their staff and the experience they brought in, this is going to be a program to reckon with very, very soon. You get the right players. And granted, it's nowhere to go but up at Colorado based on just how awful they've been. They're going to start winning some big games in Boulder.
Well, how good can his son be at quarterback, too? That's the next question. Because he's the guy.
Yeah. I think that's the part about all this that gives me the most pause. I'm not overly impressed with his son as a quarterback, quite frankly. And I watched him at Jackson State some. I know he's a 4-star recruit. Mm-hmm. They're going to do better. They're going to do better at quarterback at some point. But this is not going to be the best talent they have at quarterback.
But no one's overtaking Shedeur Sanders.
No, he's an upgrade from what Colorado had the last few years. I'm not saying he's bad. Right. I'm just not overly...
Wasn't it J.T. Shrout who was there?
He was there, but I think he kind of started some and not all the games. He's transferring out along with almost everyone else on the team once Deion took over. But I think my point is Shedeur Sanders is fine. They're eventually going to do better at quarterback than Shedeur Sanders. That's my guess.
One of the assistant coaches for Deion, Tim Brewster, in a spat with our guy, Danny Cannell, where a viral video of Brewster in the room with his new team, Colorado, with the team in the auditorium. If you haven't seen it or heard it, here is Coach Tim Brewster, tight ends coach, with the roster for Colorado.
When I say stand tall, okay, I want you bouncing out of your seat and stand tall. When I say stand tall, get your ass up. Stand tall. Sit your ass back down. Stand tall. Where you coming?
We coming.
Raise the goddamn roof. Raise the roof. We coming.
We coming.
We coming.
We coming.
If them Colorado buses show up, and 60 minutes of hell coming with it. 60 minutes of hell coming with it. The time is now, man. The time is now. Sit down.
there's Tim Brewster, and Danny Cannell retweets this and says, if you've ever wondered why college coaches don't work in the NFL, this in a nutshell is why. And he's right. I mean, this in a nutshell is exactly why college coaches that show up in an NFL locker room 5 years in the NFL would like to think I was very successful. Just ask Antonio Gates.
Yeah, I think Antonio Gates had more to do with Antonio Gates' success than Tim Brewster did. That's the most intense game of Simon Says I've ever witnessed in my life, is what he opened with. I've played the Simon Says game at basketball camps, and I've seen people who are great at leading Simon Says. To open your introduction to a team with an intense game of Simon Says, because that's what we just witnessed right there was, when I say stand tall, stand tall. Now stand tall.
It's like, what?
It's like, what? I love guys like putting their laptops down and their book bags to get ready to stand up.
Well, I guess I'll stand up.
Here's the other thing about that. If that's your introduction to a team, like there's nowhere to go but down in terms of intensity. So it's just a weird first move. Like,
or is there?
I would rather come in and keep them off guard a little bit, because if that is just your baseline,
your
I'm
tone
going to
setter.
introduce myself by coming in and being a Marine Corps drill sergeant and yelling at the top of my lung at the team. Then that just numbs you to that. So every time I have an interaction with that guy, I'm thinking, oh, this is just what it is, and there's no real response. I would have a much bigger response to coach comes in, talks to you like a man, and is being respectful, and guy in the back is talking to a buddy, or he puts the AirPods in, and coach snaps at that guy. That's the tone setter. Like, that's the one where I'm thinking, oh, man, I thought coach was going to be real nice to us, but he just made an example out of the guy in the back of the room. That's the one that's going to get a bigger response from me, is that, okay, that is telling me that if you do what's expected and you pay attention, you listen, coach is going to be fine with you and treat you with respect. But if you don't, then things may go south. Instead of Tim Brewster walking into an auditorium and screaming at everyone and playing Simon Says.
I don't know how, what do you think he would think if he saw this back on a routine basis? Right? Like, if players want to be coached hard, I don't need the coach acting like the idiot fan sitting in section 314.
Yeah, I would be embarrassed. But I think anytime, if you look back on a video of yourself getting really upset, it's embarrassing to anyone. I would hope that Tim Brewster's embarrassed, but based on his response to our guy Danny Cannell, I don't think there's a lot of embarrassment. That's just who he is. We find it odd. And I also agree with Danny Cannell that approach does not work in the NFL.
That's what you hear, too, is that, you've got the college coaches who come in and try to establish the college atmosphere in an NFL locker room, and they get laughed out of the room. It just does not go over the same way.
Urban Meyer,
but I mean,
I think it's a good example of that.
But even to the small
Matt Rule may have been an example of that.
Yeah, Saban to some regard.
Yeah, Saban, that's a great example, because there's plenty of players that played for him that said it's just not going to work based on his personality.
But there were others, that said that they loved playing for him. Jason Taylor, for instance, said he loved whenever Saban was the head coach in Miami. And I do buy into the camp that says if they land Drew Brees instead of New Orleans, it's a different story. But, yeah, I mean, by and large, the college coach transition to the NFL, that's the biggest difference, is some of them act more like the fan base instead of the locker room.
Yeah, and it's also this is not to lack discipline. Their disciplined coaches still work, and yelling at players is something that happens all the time. Those things can work. I think there are so many things that are just silly now.
Yeah.
That you can look back. Like that right there is just silly.
Well, that's old school, too.
There's nothing about that. Nick Saban having discipline, but even Nick Saban, there are the stories you hear about Nick Saban that's like, really, dude?
Yeah.
Where he's yelling at the janitor, or he's yelling at someone just to yell at someone, and you're thinking, that's just not – you could still be Nick Saban and cut out a lot of that. I'm sure Nick Saban's wife probably, Miss Terry, tells him that all the time, too. And I'm sure he's gotten better about it over the years. You don't have to be that way all the time. Bobby Knight was a great coach. We can ask Dan Dockich about this. If Dan Dockich is going to be honest with us, I'm sure that he could tell us there were plenty of things that Coach Knight did that was just silly and that was way over the top just for the sake of being over the top, right? I feel that way when I watch Tim Brewster, that is this really necessary? I'm not some powder puff guy that thinks players shouldn't get yelled at or disciplined or any of that stuff. I just see that as an introduction and think, this is just, it's a waste of time. It's excessive. It's not efficient. I don't understand what point you're trying to prove by coming in and playing insanity Squid Game version of Simon Says in front of your team for the first time.
Well, especially in an era where you can leave a year later if you don't like it. It's more and more rare that we'll see this.
Now, we heard Kirby Smart's pregame speech,
which he says was not pregame for that game. It was a pregame speech, but it was not for that game.
Well, either way, I'm saying that style can still work, right? I don't know that he's like that in a negative way. That was more of a pump your team up type thing.
For sure.
But it's an interesting question to ponder about where college sports are headed, the mentality of young people of this generation that's playing right now, and what styles are going to prove to be most effective in terms of management and leadership with coaches and players. I'll always argue this, though. Athletes and competitors and players, they want to know the score at all times, and they want to know the expectation.
And where they stand.
Setting standards and setting a time and having someone be somewhere at a certain time, all of those things, that organization is great for young athletes. That's never going to change. So I'm not saying just some setup where the coach is, hey, we're all equal here, and this is a collaboration, and you tell me how long you want to practice, and you tell me how you want to condition, and we're all going to get along and do that. No, guys, even professionals, they want to know what the expectations are. They want guys being honest with them, and they want to know the score, for lack of a better term, at all times. And I think that's never going to change in sports.